Okay, thank you, Cal. So here is the our draft systematic conservation plan. I decided to display and navigate to show everyone it in our stakeholder input application map that we've generated. This application has the plan, several boundary layers, and all of our input layers for you to navigate through. It's also going to allow you to create points and polygons and answer just a couple questions to give us any constructive criticism or comments about things that we might be missing, or other things that you might think are important for the next iterations of this plan. So once again, this map is attempting to meet conservation goals most efficiently by protecting habitat patches while showing preference to land patches that provide the best ecosystem services and encouraging some clustering of the planning units. The dark green areas are the areas that are showing the highest priority, going to medium green, then that light yellowish color being the lower priority habitat areas. The computer program runs 100 iterations trying to create different conservation plans meeting the same goals, and then it adds all of those iterations up together, and the ones that were chosen 100% of the time are the ones that we now see as the highest priority in those dark green, or they're areas that are already under some sort of protection. Before I break down some of the bigger picture items of this plan, I first wanted to just point out once again the sheer amount of area within the Congaree biosphere region that is already under some sort of protection. That's that darkish blue color. You can see Congaree National Park is obviously down here. Fort Jackson, large amount of area under a form of protection, and then all the different areas, conservation easements or heritage reserves within the Kawasi Basin. It's just a sheer testament to the conservation partnerships that already have existed within this area for quite some time. I also wanted to address the aspect of this portion of our conservation plan not being included within, even though it's a part of the Congaree Biosphere region. So technically this area drains into the lower Petey River, believe it or not, and even this small sliver goes to the lower Petey and not into the Wateree and the Santee. Since we were sticking within the Santee watershed for several of our data input layers, that's why that portion of the biosphere is not in it, and why our study area isn't exactly the same as the biosphere region boundary. So the first big picture item about the conservation plan is this large portion of high priority section on the southern part of the Kawasi Basin focus area. As you saw, much of this area is already under some form of protection, so it makes sense that the model is trying to close in the gaps that already exist that are relatively simple compared to the other sections that are very, very open and much more difficult to create large cores of protected habitat. So that's not to say that all these areas are possibly available to be protected, or that it's absolutely mandatory that all the areas are protected before moving on to something else. But it is important just to see that we know ecosystem conservation, some of the best conservation happens in these large cores of habitat, and that this could be your best bang for your buck when it comes to trying to protect future land areas. The next big picture item to look at for this conservation plan is this inverse sea connectivity that the plan is trying to create. There's already a pretty strong connection, from Congaree National Park all the way up the Wateree because of the conservation of the Kawasi Basin focus area. And areas such as the Wateree Heritage Reserve right in this area and the conservation easements surrounding it to its west already are beginning to make a connection to Fort Jackson Army Base. However, some of these areas that are under some form of protection or near form of protection are showing up as really high priorities to create a buffered connection between Fort Jackson and the Kawasi Basin focus area. I think this is a really neat aspect, really important aspect of the conservation plan. It's also showing that its preference for picking these areas to the south and southeast of Fort Jackson with high ecosystem services valuation. So by creating this strong connection in the uplands to the west of the quasi-basin focus area, moving down towards Congaree National Park, and then of course like the Ponset bombing range, you're creating connection between multiple types of habitat, and especially between the uplands and the bottomland hardwood forests. So those are two of the really big picture items that are showing up from the conservation plan. Some of the smaller things to point out: the high priority near the watery village, at the kind of the elbow of Watery and Congaree in the Kawasi Basin. This is creating a larger buffer in this relatively narrow area on the eastern edge of Congaree National Park. And some of the high connection of this is also coming from the high connectivity values for the bobwhite as they move into this upland area along this ecotone, this forest edge. There's also a broader lower priority, a little less selection or direction given within these working lands in the uplands and just to the west of the Watery and the Kawasi Basin focus area. There are several riparian corridors in this area, including places like Tom's Creek, which would be some of the higher priority areas to focus on due to their biodiversity and freshwater community conservation needs. One more note that we wanted to point out was this orange corridor that I've placed here. Though it wasn't selected as a part of our efficiency plan, because our goals were already being met in other places, we view that this Cedar Creek corridor is really, both Kyle and I both repeatedly came back to it as a biodiversity connectivity importance, and also due to having several species of interest or concern in the freshwater community. So obviously Cedar Creek is also an important ecotourism aspect for locals and visitors alike, and it's a priority in Kyle's aquatic model, and in the decades moving forward, especially as there's increasing land change coming from Columbia, it could provide a natural visual break into the working lands that could be conserved in this lower priority part of the conservation plan. So providing this protection of this riparian corridor could be very important, not only for the health of the wildlife community, but also for the health of some of the socioeconomic factors that are important for this region. So those are a few of the major takeaways from this plan that we wanted to point out. The next thing we wanted to do was now show you how you are able to give us suggestions and comments for the plan and into the next iterations of this plan. Okay, so I've been showing the conservation plan using, like I said, our stakeholder input map application. And so you've seen me turn on and off layers. You can do this yourself in the layer list in the top right. You can click on that and then use these two arrows, drop down, and you can actually see all the layers that we used as inputs into the marksand model. So let's say you're really interested in the reptile species richness from the gap data analysis. You can click that on, and it'll actually show the reptiles richness per hexagon across the entire study area. And then you can also turn off the other layers above it. You can think of these as layers of the cake if you haven't used this type of GIS application before. Layers sitting on top of them, and so once you click those off, it exposes the layers below. And so for these reptiles, you see that the darkest blues are the areas with the highest species richness, going to the reds with the lowest species richness within that hexagon. These, of course, aren't the totals for species richness in the area, just that one hexagon. So turn that back off. the conservation plan back on. You may have also noticed that in the middle of my previous presentation I switched all of a sudden to a world imagery, a satellite imagery. You can turn that back off and go to the original base map that we had. I had added that world imagery by going up to this add data, clicking on it, and then actually just searching world. And I knew that it was world imagery, so that's why I found it quickly. You can also remove that from your map if you want, or add it back in. Close that up. The overall legend is this button right to the left of the layers list. This shows the full legend of the things that are on the map right now. This is the conservation plan, once again 100% being the highest priorities, and then these lighter colors being the lowest priorities, and we're not showing ones below 5%. So here and then there's the most important aspect of this. This is where you are able to provide us comments. In a typical setting, when the workshops we were planning, we were going to have huge printouts of these maps where we could use Sharpies and add lots of comments. But in this case, we're going to be using these digital maps. So you can click the Smart Editor. Say it's a point that you just want to point out to us. Maybe it's over in this aspect of the eastern side towards Sumner of the Quasi Basin. You can click on it. It'll generate a point. You can give us your name. Or maybe there's a name of an expert that you think is more important for us to contact. Your contact email, the expert's contact email. This is important for our record keeping and future work that we're trying to accomplish. What plan are you commenting on? Or what input are you commenting on? Most of what we're looking for is input comments on the conservation plan itself, but maybe you have comments on a terrestrial thing that I'm missing, or you think would be very important to add, or aquatic or ecosystem services. And then we can direct the query or comment to the appropriate person. And then you could say, this is really important for XYZ species. Then you can hit save. So if you want to add another one immediately, you actually have to hit cancel here. It'll solidify that point there. You can see it turned green because you commented on the conservation plan, also called the integrated plan, because it integrated these three aspects. And then if you can actually now click on it, and you can see your name, your email address, what plan you inputted on in your comment. So let's say it's actually a larger area that you're interested in giving a comment about. You can click on, once again, under Smart Editor, New Feature. And then you can actually draw a polygon. So I'm not holding the button down, I'm just clicking once again, clicking once again, then double clicking. And that actually then draws a polygon over a much larger area. Once again, I can put my name in, contact email, and then it's important to once again tell us what plan you're commenting on. Let's say it's on the terrestrial input. Maybe it's another thing about a species input that might be missing. So we do terrestrial input, and then you provide some comment hopefully, and then hit save. So now you've generated a polygon and given us also more comments on that, and once it's deselected it'll actually be orange because it's on the terrestrial data input. So this was the main way that we are looking for comments from the conservation stakeholders in the area. You'll be able to access this stakeholder input map by following the website that's in the agenda on the WebEx meeting. If you need that link, feel free to email me. This will be the web page that we've generated, where you can get more information on the terrestrial models, ecosystem services models, the aquatic models, the integrated plan itself. We're soon to have a longer tutorial on how to use this web map than what I'm talking about right now. And then there'll also be a link to this webinar that we're recording. So now to get to this map, you can just click on Stakeholder Input, and it'll open up a fresh one of the maps. Okay, so thank you very much. That concludes our webinar. So we're now going to go over some of the questions that we've been receiving in the chat.